Hi, folks. Welcome to BINJ Live, the second episode. I'm Jason Pramas, Executive Director of the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism. This is my co-host, Chris Faraone, and our guest, Eliza Dewey. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but welcome back. Welcome. And now, as usual, I'm going to turn off this AI-generated music-like slop, just very abruptly. And hey, here we are.
We're going to get in trouble for not hiring a live band, you know.
Well, we could always, we should pull in Shira, people we know, and have them play. we can do that once we get more advanced.
We could use.
So, Chris, take it away. I mean, you've been editing Eliza, so you should just take us there.
Well, yeah, and I learned a lot from watching last week's, which is that I spoke way too much, and I was just all over the place. Maybe it's because I sit in front of like 5 screens. You can see them reflected in my lenses. But really, Eliza, I mean, this is all about having you all talk, and then we, edit it down, and hopefully we don't get sued like 60 Minutes for change, not running everything you say at length. But, this is a free / long format show, and I think it's great. You've been replaced Dan Atkinson, I guess, in some sense, and doing some of the high level work for us. Props to Dan, who's, still doing investigations, but for the state, actually. But Eliza, you stepped in and just done some remarkable work. So I want to start, obviously, with please just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we could talk about the story that brought you to us, which is we share a lot of interest, you and I and Gene Traunstein and a lot of other people in this crew. So tell us more.
Sure. Well, hey, everyone. I was telling Jason before we started, this is weirdly out of my comfort zone because I come a little bit from a video production background where I was the person behind the camera. And now I'm like, oh, wait, I'm the one in front of the camera. So I'm getting a little taste of my own medicine. And maybe some of the people that I've put in front of camera will watch this and get like a little schadenfreude from it. But I've been in journalism for 10 years. Or I guess 11. So I started back with community journalism, writing for the Dorchester Reporter and the Bay State Banner for a little bit. Then went down to Miami for a little bit. I was doing some video production for an outlet called Fusion, which was kind of like a Vice type vibe. They are no longer around, which happens in our industry. And then I came back up to Boston. I was working at GBH News for a while, doing video production there. And then I was there for like 4 years, and then at the Globe doing video production. So that's sort of where I've been. But yeah,
I have to ask, just, can you just comment on, I'll use it as a YouTube short because it's just so meta. Yeah. I assume that, you've done a lot of great work, and I've seen some of it on video, and this whole world of pivot to video, which we saw happen 3 times at least. And, people like you who get caught up in all of that, was video your, kind of like your first and foremost? Was that your medium to begin with? And just, because, hey, we're dipping in, but on the lower end scale, we're not investing in a lot of these companies. And here I am rambling again, but really, I love video. I always have. I was making movies in college before YouTube. Thank God it was before YouTube, right? But really, Eliza, tell us about that. What kind of stuff and what format do you like to do videos in? And I appreciate you've done some great short stuff for some of the stories we're going to talk about tonight also.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I ended up, video was not my first love. I ended up going into it. I guess the first video production job I had was the Miami one, the Fusion one in Miami. And it really was, in some senses, like a outgrowth of where the industry was going. I needed a job, and I had a friend who knew someone who, said, oh, you should at least apply and see what happens. And so I got an entry-level production assistant job there. And so I kind of was funneled into it because that was what was stable. And then I've kind of stuck with it and really grew to love a lot of the video production process. But interestingly enough, what kind of brought me to you all was the thing that I did miss was when you're involved with a production team, usually it's studio based, or a lot of outlets tend to prioritize studio based. And then I missed at least like the reporting where you're digging in and like discovering something new. Production is a lot more, it tends to be more about like telling a visual story that's compelling, but you're not necessarily the one who, just because you only have 24 hours in a day and you need to sleep, you're not necessarily the one that's like going out and reporting and then producing. So I missed the reporting, which is how I ended up on my own time then reporting the privatized prison story, which is how we kind of linked up.
Well, yeah. So how do you come on to, I mean, the big header is healthcare in Massachusetts prisons, which, and this is anything but a boring topic. So don't go away if you're just doing healthcare. I know I am a person who runs when I hear that word or two words is how we're spelling it these days, right? But Eliza, tell us the general, like, what was your first in? How did you determine that this was a story? And I'll just throw in that when it comes to prison stories, we don't exactly worry that other people are covering it. Props to Deb Becker at BUR and the few others who occasionally dip in. But was that one of your concerns? Like, is somebody else on this? And so just tell us about that process.
Yeah. I have always just been really passionate about criminal justice in general. That was something that, even back like 10 years ago, drove me to pursue journalism in the first place. And so then last year, when I was trying to figure out like, what could I report that's new and local, I was looking around, and I kind of had, of course, in the back of my mind, the idea of privatization in general, whether we're talking about prison, we're talking about healthcare for people in the general population outside of prison, like privatization ends up selling out people's health. So, so I knew, there would be a privatized angle. Massachusetts does not have private prisons. So it just so happened, I looked at the healthcare thing, and then it just so happened that last summer, the contract was being switched from one contractor, one business to another that contracts with the state. So I actually thought it was going to be like a 30-day story or a 30-day reporting process. Right. So I reached out to some people, some sources and stuff last summer and said, hey, what are you guys seeing? What are you guys hearing? And they all got back to me and they said, we're obviously keeping an eye open and an ear open, but it's just too early. Like, we don't have enough information. And so they were very like cautious about overstating anything, which, was appropriate. So then
we could say their name. WellPath was the company on the way out.
Yes.
And there was a new contractor coming
Vital
in.
Core was coming in.
And Vital Core coming in. So
these names are horrible, by the way.
Yeah, I know. Vital Core.
I feel like we're watching some like Schwarzenegger movie. It's the evil co.
So I got with WellPath. There's no need for hyperbole. I mean, they were being sued just all across the country, and I mean, they were called out by Massachusetts people, Congress people from Massachusetts. So this was like, how much attention did you pay before we get to Vital Core on WellPath, on the company on the way out?
Yeah, I mean, I was very aware of it because there was so much reporting on it nationwide. And I mean, truly like sickening stories that you can find from outlets across the country. And, shout out to all the small independent outlets across the country that have covered a lot of those stories. And just really like sickening stories of people being denied care, dying. So I knew that, but and so I looked into WellPath, but primarily just because of the timing. I wasn't looking so much at WellPath. I was more so looking ahead at like the new contractor, kind of, if the state says that they're going to be different, let's try and examine that and see if that's the case.
So give us some of and I have it in front of me. I don't want to put you on the spot for the numbers. We do a lot of data-driven stuff, and I want to stress this is a story that look at that technology. So I want to stress that this is the kind of story that we really love doing, because it's the kind of story that especially when someone like Eliza Dewey does it, that other reporters and other outlets can look to as a source. And there's a lot of numbers in here that just, it took a lot. So, kudos on this, on the journalism here and on the research. So give us anything in particular that pops out to you. What's your elevator pitch on this?
And should we show your first story on screen for folks?
Oh yeah,
he's
got the current one. This is the follow-up. Let's get.
I can do the first one. Yeah.
Yeah. So the first one is basically the big general feature about WellPath leaving the state and Vital Core coming in, and it's actually you hit it. It took a while to do, but of course that much work was needed. Also, we got a complete year in. So it's like looking at the first year of them being in Massachusetts. What did you find?
Yeah, I mean, I found really concerning stories from prisoners and from former staff alike. So one thing that I was rereading the article before this, and I was reminded of one of the former, actually, I think still current, and he's named in the story, Jason Sylvia. He was totally open to being on the record, and he spoke to me about the transition that happened between the two companies. And so the issues that they had with filling staff and basically some broken promises about how new staff would get raises under the new contractor. And then the new contractor came in and said, that's not our problem. We didn't promise that. And I think what Jason kind of highlighted really well was the sort of the disorganization that can happen. And, in the private industry, like if you're just talking about, I don't know, a private industry that sells shoes or whatever, and you jump from one company to the next and there's chaos, okay, that's fine. They don't sell as many shoes. But like when you're talking about people's health and you have chaos that's happening in the transition from one company to the next, you have staffers that are being overworked, people who are looking at like upwards of 100 hours a week as nurses and healthcare staff. So that's sort of a recipe for disaster, and that was within like the first month or two of the switchover. And then you also have on the patient side still issues of people like not getting specialty care, not getting follow-up for care, and their doctors even writing down, in official documents, like, I'm concerned about my patient. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially, I'm concerned about my patient. So this
is so shocking. This is so much revealing stuff in here. I got to ask, like, some of it comes from documents that you got from sources, but how was it to me when I started working with you on this? My first shock was like, the initial shock of how crazy this stuff is. So my question to you is, how your sourcing is amazing, and I know it was difficult to find the people, but once you did, how easy was it for them to get them to be forthcoming? And also, now I'm more shocked that this isn't more widely reported, even though it's prisons and we all know it's ignored. So what was your thought process in all of that, and what was it like talking to these sources? What did it take to get them to, I don't know if open up is the word, but really to share all this stuff, to know you weren't wasting their time?
Yeah. I mean, speaking to prisoners and outreach, which I did through a couple of different methods. Like one was through organizations and through attorneys. The other is I actually just sent like not cold calls, but cold letters.
And I have some letters for you, by the way. I'm going to send those from home.
Oh, awesome.
The ones I just sent over, Chris?
Yeah. Sorry,
cool.
Go
on. But yeah, so I had, and the cold letters that I did, it was based on the fact that Beacon Hill had this hearing that was like, I guess, a first of its kind. I forget what year, maybe like 2023 or something. A first of its kind where they had incarcerated people testify about something that would impact their daily life. It wasn't healthcare related, but it was something else. And so I just went through, it was like a 3-hour hearing, and I just went through the hearing and picked out names of people who were at the hearing and wrote to them because I figured if they're already willing to put their face out there for this issue, they might very well be willing to put their face out for another issue, or at least point me to someone else. And then, once you hear from enough people, people might respond and say, I don't have anything to share, but like, I know someone else. So you kind of get it that way. And then of course you also I had to look at like, what can I verify in some form or fashion? But that's, so it kind of, I guess as with anything, it's like, once you start, it's like a web. And then, one person leads to the next.
It's wild. I just, there's so many, I was like, what should I read in particular here? It's really,
let me know.
It's almost like torture. Well, I got it in front of me too. Don't worry. I don't need to, I need to follow your teleprompter, Jason.
Well, then just so I can show the folks at home, So it's.
Yeah. So well, actually, why don't you tell us about James Ware, who's one of the prisoners who you focus on, and who you just recently wrote a follow-up on. But what's the initial? Because I think it, usually there's so much here that shows this is a problem with the system that I'm fully comfortable as an editor showing, telling the story through the lens of a particular prisoner or two, because it really is just how it is. Now, are these extreme situations? Sure, but not totally. They're not one of a kind. So tell us about James and how you got in touch.
Yeah, James, I believe, was someone I got in touch with through sort of like person, A to B to C. Like he was a little more indirect in terms of how I found him. But then once I'm trying to remember. I mean, basically once I reached out, and then I was able to, I think what made the difference is I was able to reach out to him. He was very open. He spoke with me very plainly about what he had experienced. And then I was able to reach his attorney, who was very open to speaking with me. And she was able to provide the documentation of how James Ware's physicians in the community that he was sent to on occasion by the DOC were expressing their concerns. So then I have in written form a physician saying, I'm very concerned about this. He's been given inadequate care, in so many words. So that, I think just the combination of the written documentation plus the seriousness of what he experienced and how long his poor care went on for and how it spanned both companies, all of that just so happened to be the case. And so, of course, it grabbed my attention.
Wow, it's wild. Yeah, and so people really this is one that this kind of story is the reason we do this. I can't stress that enough. So just unbelievable work here, and it's something I hope we can build on. And I think part of this show, one of the reasons is obviously prudently to discuss future reporting, to have a newsroom conversation. So to briefly go there, and I don't know if anything Jason wants to add on too. For me, I have been looking a lot at, we're doing also a lot of reporting on opioid settlement funds, and surprise, there's going to be a story that comes out next week, I think, about how none of those settlement funds are going to the DOC. Literally zero, not a dollar of the $1 billion that's coming to Massachusetts by 2038. So we'll be putting that story out, but there obviously is a lot of money that goes into the DOC for buprenorphine and various treatments and other services as well. And it's a lot to get into. But here's the big catch. And I know you mentioned this because it was a little caveat that we didn't confuse readers with, but WellPath, the company that with its head hung low, left Massachusetts last year for Vital Core to take over, didn't leave Massachusetts. They literally are still operating here in Bridgewater, I believe, under a different name.
Great.
And they're the ones handing out Suboxone. And I can't even, it's so this is the kind of stuff that actually, I don't know if it drives me nuts just because of how ridiculous it is, or how, I guess maybe that's why people get away with it. It's so crazy. Like, are they here or not? Are we celebrating that they're gone, or are they still a vendor here? So, give us a little, what do you know about that? What can you
Yeah.
preview?
I mean, from what I do know, mostly just from reading, not as much really my own reporting on that point, but I do know, WellPath, basically, like when they went out of business on a national level, like they were able to file for bankruptcy and then like restructure. So yeah, like you said, restructure, and then an element of that business remains. And then there you go. And then it's interesting with like Suboxone. I would anticipate that part of the reason why it's able to proceed that way is, on the one hand, of course, in like addiction recovery circles, some people really look at Suboxone as like the, maybe not gold standard, but as something that's very helpful. They're like, let's do harm reduction as opposed to just do the Narcotics Anonymous way of not doing any drugs at all. So people have looked at that as like, this is a more realistic way to treat addiction. So it's perhaps good intentions, but then it can also morph into something else if you push it on people that don't necessarily need it. So just from what I know of that space. Yeah.
And at the same time, so this is like a little kind of conundrum, Jason. I don't know if here's a little brain teaser for you. So there's actually been some excellent reporting I've seen about deaths in prisons and opioid related deaths nationally, and this stuff happens sporadically. Not the deaths; those happen constantly. The reporting. So I heard, this is so ignorant. I don't know the source. I heard that there is just this massive waiting list for Suboxone and methadone in prison. Now, okay, what are you doing in the meantime? So it's just such a concession that there's a problem, which they're not really. Departments of correction are reluctant to do under ordinary circumstances, but I guess since it is just so severe. But to say that, so if you're on a waiting list, what does that mean? That means you're either not on drugs, and this is definitely a part of it, I believe, and I don't have numbers here and working on that. So there are definitely people who are, you're locked up, you're not, you're kicked, you're not on anything, and then you're going to go on? Is that the waiting list, or are they people who are strung out behind the wall? Getting stuff and staying high illegally,
right,
to that extent for months as they wait for their buprenorphine treatment, courtesy of WellPath, I suppose. So, and I'm of course making these circumstances up, and we really are working on this reporting. But tell me, so what is that? There's a wait list, and by the way, some studies show that there's up to 60% of people have substance abuse disorder in Mass Department of Correction, which is just mind-boggling. So.
Yeah, I wouldn't know, but I think that's definitely that's an important point, because like you said, I mean, if people are waiting, what is that an admission of? Are you admitting we're just letting people be dope sick and like suffer? Are we admitting like we being the DOC? Yeah, not us. Yeah.
I mean, this is the kind of system that people in People Land don't typically think much about, that they just sort of assume stuff is being handled, by the bureaucracies that have been set up to handle them, or corporations now increasingly in many cases in areas that used to be government only. Stuff is handed off to them, money is made, and there's even less service provision than there was before. So yeah, the answer is people go off cliffs of various kinds once they're in the clutches of these systems, whether they deserved it or not, whether it's just or not, there they are. And it's quite clear from the two major pieces Eliza's done so far on prison healthcare in Massachusetts that no, nothing happens. People just go without. They go without meds. They go without psych care. They go without regular medical care. They're supposed to have appointments, and like the guards just don't take them, and then they just have to wait again, more, wait. This guy, the main subject of your reporting, James Ware, they knew he had a nodule in his lung for years, and they let him go to stage 4.
Yeah,
not just WellPath originally, and not even just Vital Core later, kind of after the fact, but he impugns Shattuck Hospital, which is government run, I believe. That's right. Yeah. And there clearly have been a number of medical practitioners that have had his case. And it's true, and your reporting points this out too, that sometimes they order tests and stuff. Those just don't happen, so it can't just put the blame on them. You got to put at least some of it on, the medical staff at Shattuck and elsewhere. One cannot always assume that just because somebody's poor and been in prison a long time and did some bad stuff when they were younger, that they can't accurately observe their surroundings. I'm always impressed by how eloquent many prisoner subjects are in our reportage and other, outlets that cover prisons. Like, people get educated in prison if they weren't before. Like, they know what's going on and they'll articulate it, but we're not supposed to believe them.
And that really struck me, the point you mentioned about him simply not being brought to appointments.
Yeah.
And maybe I shouldn't have been surprised by it, but I think in my many conversations with James over the past months, and with his attorney, who could back things up with documentation, I would be, on the phone, so they just didn't bring you? And he'd be like, yeah, they told me to be ready. I was ready at 6:30 a.m. and I just sat there, and then no one showed up, and I never got an explanation. So even something as simple as that, which is being brought to a determined appointment. So,
and I want to emphasize something here. There's people who will probably hear things like this, see statistics, and of course, I wouldn't even call it conservative, people who just don't care about people who are incarcerated. And but the interesting thing is that down south and in a lot of red states, even conservatives, particularly fiscal conservatives, have figured out how to care about this because there's so much mismanagement involved, whether it's a private contractor or a public institution. Now, in Massachusetts, if you're sitting there thinking, oh well, there's just not enough money for good health care.
Bullshit.
I can stop you right now because Massachusetts, and there's different ways they calculate it, but by some measures, spends the most money per prisoner of any state in the country. Also has the least in its state prison system, which I would argue, our county prison system is also significant. But anyway, so spends the most, has the least people. So right there, that we should have something going on there. Also, these contracts that Eliza looked at have a lot of unfulfilled positions. That's a big part of the problem. So they don't even have the number of people: psychiatrists, clinical directors, unit coordinators, support people, social workers, SUD counselors. Don't even have the number that they're contracted to have. So it's not even money. They're literally not spending the money. And by the way, how much money? Hundreds of millions. We're talking about $770 million for a 5-year contract. And of course, we know how contracts work in Massachusetts. That'll balloon up. That'll be, they'll need extra money for this, and there'll be penalty after penalty, but yet they will get more money. Anytime there's a penalty, there's an addendum to the contract. So excellent. So I don't know I think this is a great, and we know where we're going with this. And before we get on to drones briefly, anything you want to
everybody must get
anything else you want to kind of say about the new piece on James, or about just, I don't know, this is a kind of a miserable topic to cover, but we have Jean Traunstein, who will be one of our next guests. I'm speaking to her tomorrow, and I'm sure she'll want to talk about a lot of these topics. She's been in it forever. How about you? Are you gonna be you're moving on to drones? I think that's a lateral move as far as depressing topics are concerned. But where are you on prisons? I know you have some immediate work here to do, hopefully with us on the WellPath stuff. But how about looking forward, and what else are you doing for other people? You feel free to promote here.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, depressing things are my beat.
Yay.
I mean, I think just because when I speak to people who are negatively impacted by these, whether it's multi-million-dollar corporations or systems, other, public systems of oppression, when I speak to them and I hear them say in their own words, what happened to them and how much they want to get their story out there, that is what even though it's a depressing topic, that's what also to me is the motivating factor. And so, so I mean, I guess that's a long-winded way of saying definitely will be continuing on criminal justice, so prisons, healthcare or not, but prisons and government policing, surveillance. So all of it wrapped together, an ugly bow.
I mean, one of the kind of mic drop in your first major piece on prisons, you had that cat Delgado, right, who'd been a Springfield gang leader. Is that right? And he was appalled by the criminality of the supposed healthcare corporation, right? I'm like, what is that telling us? And so you have a deep well to dip from, Eliza, right? Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, that's the story. That's the oldest story there is. That's like, trading. It's like trading places when he sees like how they when Eddie Murphy sees how they make money on Wall Street, or and whatever that is in Philadelphia on the exchange, on the Merck exchange, and Mario Puzo writing in The Godfather that a lawyer could do more crime with a briefcase than a gangster with a gun. I hate to misquote Mario Puzo, but nevertheless, this is the thing. So this is a Springfield, person who's been involved in a lot of street shit, and who says to Eliza,
his thing, which sort of rounds out the article, was he wrote in a letter, he was appalled by what he had done in his life. And I want to mention also, throughout talking to the men who are quoted in the story, they were all very reflective on the harms they had caused other people. They were in for a variety of different crimes, but I would say pretty much all of them were violent convictions. But yeah, so Alex Delgado, he wrote in his letter to me, like, he's had a lot of time to reflect, a lot of things that he is filled with regret over. But then he said, at least I don't make money off of it like I used to when I was like a gang leader. But I can't say the same thing for these corporations. So, and he's another one who very much wrote to me several times and was passionate about kind of saying, it's not just me, Alex Delgado, saying this, like I'm speaking to other people who are around me, my cellmates, etc. And there's multiple people who have these stories to share.
And it's, I think, I was just going to say, it always strikes me that people, especially that survive as long as some of these folks have in prison, and then, before that on various streets around the Commonwealth and elsewhere, if they don't get what they need in the most horrible conditions, they almost make what they need. Like, I remember that I've studied the history of the Soviet Union, somewhat, including prisons there, the gulags, kind of famous or infamous. Prisoners there took tea and created something called chifir. They concentrated tea to the point where it became hallucinogenic. Okay.
Is that like what kefir? Like what? Is that like what we now call kefir? Like basically like kombucha? No.
Could be. No, I mean, it wasn't that kind of tea. It wasn't, maybe there was like fungus or whatever involved. I don't know. But I think it was just so potent, that it made people hallucinate, feel slightly better for a while at some cost to their health. I mean, it's not that different from people just brewing alcohol however they can in U.S. prisons traditionally, right? However they can do it in toilet bowls, whatever. And just to cope, right? And I worry now, and I think I have a feeling Eliza wants to touch on this, that as things get only worse with the current federal government, and it's weird, so many of them claim to be, big Christians and all this, but a lot of these characters at all levels of government, particularly the current federal government, seem to relish human suffering of outgroups, and prisoners are definitely pole position for them to treat badly. Like, I feel like even where there have been programs, sometimes federally funded, that might, try to make lemons from lemonade with a lot of very damaged people who have indeed, as you've already pointed out, done a lot of horrible stuff. And we shouldn't forget that. But I mean, there are limits to how much one can punish, right? and there are limits to the usefulness of this. So, there were more like loan libraries. There were more, different kind of occupations people could have. And in more decent states, perhaps like Massachusetts, although I wonder sometimes, maybe you could learn a trade. You can certainly go to college, stuff like that. Things are taken away more and more. And you wrote, Eliza, a fair amount, 2 or 3 examples of, we know there's been increasing use of solitary confinement, and it's been found to be, by various human rights organizations and government entities, it's been found to be torture, right? And people are just left in these empty cells with lights on all the time, abusive guards, maybe an hour out of that cell a day, no human commerce or contact. And sometimes you're saying in one of your pieces, the screws will just throw razor blades in with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was found, for anyone watching who hasn't gotten a chance to read the story, this big report that Massachusetts and the DOJ did on Massachusetts basically found that there were some sick cases of guards providing the razors for prisoners to self-harm. Yeah.
I often say that, with a lot of this stuff, the easiest way into a building is through the front door. And a lot of these studies that are done, whether they're by prisoners, PLS, Prison Legal Services, or other organizations, or even by the state. So, self-audit sometimes. This is stuff that should be on the cover of every newspaper or whatever it is these days. It's not. We're happy to report it. On the other hand, I'm going to transition here to your next. On the other hand, there's drones.
Yeah.
Very similar to prisons in that they're kind of just ignored no, they're different. So drones, I want to bring everyone back who's listening to 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, there was this huge thing. I think Trump had just taken office and drones were being spotted around DC, I think in New Jersey, tri-state area. And then there was someone like on Cape Cod who was like, I have a drone in my backyard. And I swear it was 15 minutes. Everybody was just batshit crazy over drones. I remember the television news and it was unbelievable. And they would interview somebody and they would know nothing. And then they didn't find anything out. It was really not reporting. And then the Trump administration was like, nah, everything's fine. And everyone was like, oh, okay. I mean, that was really the extent of the conversation. We've reported on drones quite extensively this year. I said this is our 3rd or 4th piece. Tell us about it. And this is definitely the first of what will be more, because we didn't get much information. Although I think in this case, the negative or the not getting a response is the story. So tell us, where were you? What were you looking for?
Yeah. And for anyone watching, we should have an update coming out, because after the publication of this, we did get some stuff back. So there will be an update on that. But I basically, I knew that there would be BPD, Boston Police drones there, simply because I looked at the records that are available for anyone to find. That the city does, the BPD does a report of all the deployments that they do each year, but they'll do it at the end of the year. Right. So I knew from looking at 2024 that they had done 14 drones over the Dominican parade, which was the most deployments that they recorded for any event, except for trainings. There were some trainings where they did more than 14, but for like non-training events, it was the most listed. And I was thinking about this because I, just being from Dorchester, I've been to the Caribbean Carnival, which is usually right after the Dominican parade. Been there many times over the years. Saw something in 2024 that was like this big billboard that said recording in process. And so that caught my attention because I was like, okay, they're recording everyone. That's a lot of faces to be recording. I didn't see what recording equipment. It might not have been drones. It might have been on the poles. But I was like, okay, they're recording a lot of people and they're letting us know, but that's kind of interesting. So then fast forward to this year, I was like, let me just go and see, what I see in terms of recording equipment. and specifically in terms of drones, just because of all this background knowledge. So we sent the public records request to BPD for both events, Dominican Parade and Caribbean Carnival. And they were way past the 10 business day limit of like when they're supposed to get something back for a public records request.
What else is new?
So, and I was telling other people this, who aren't journalists and don't, like think about public records requests often. And people would ask me like, well, how can they do that? And I was like, well, I mean, they kind of just can unless you sue them, essentially. So, I mean, unless you all have other experiences from that, but
us, no.
We've actually, this year, not with BPD, but we've had success more than ever with the Secretary of the Commonwealth. I would say ruling with us, deciding with us. That one with the Department of Public Health and getting those opioid recovery numbers. Yeah. And more recently, why is it's evading me right now? I'll think of it, but I'm happy about it. But listen, with BPD, it's always this game and drones, and it's just this back and forth. And props to those who have never stopped, whether it's Alex Matthews at Restore the Fourth or Kate Crockford at the ACLU, of course. And it's the same people over and over. I'm glad to kind of dip my toe in there every now and then. I think this work you're doing is great, and I think they should be held to account more often than once a year on their own terms. So,
well, there has been some good advocacy in the last decade, which has helped. I mean, that's true, right? So,
and the bigger part of the story is it's relevant to a lot of other things going on, including national news, because who are they sharing the information with? I think that's the big question here.
Yeah, and I can say so. Because I got a response back after we published this article, and we gave them more than the 10 days required. But so afterwards, I did get like a 1-line sentence response to one of my questions saying, no, we were not asked by any federal agencies for anything from these drones. So
they weren't asked. What an interesting way. They weren't asked. We just gave it to them.
Well, no, also they told me, they said, no, we did not give anything. And then I said, well, okay, but were you even requested? I just wanted to know, did the feds even try? And then they said, no, they didn't. So that's squared away on that. Or
they wouldn't have to try if they didn't have to be asked. You know what I mean? Like if they already had access, for example, who can say? But we can continue to try to find out. I don't know if you're finding that, I mean, over the years, I feel like as there's less and less journalism, subjects like police that we might interview and just all kinds of public officials and corporate officials just don't even necessarily aren't even used to feeling like they have to answer questions or even talk to us. Are you running into that? More, less, same, what?
I don't know if I can quantify it. I mean, I do think just in general, I like at stints where I worked for corporate broadcast, which were very short, I definitely saw the thing of, like the nightly news broadcast where they get their stuff fed to them directly from police departments.
Yeah, some of our best reporters have simultaneously been working in television newsrooms, and I'm like, my first question is always like, why didn't they want this story? And they're like, are you kidding? They would never do it. They're not interested in actually reporting this. And then after that, after we do it, I'm like, now do they want it? We did the heavy lifting. They could just have it. No. It's like, it's not some conspiracy. I think like a lot of people think it's laziness, it's complicity, and I think complicitness. And I think that anytime, I know. Stay tuned. Next episode. No, but basically, no. I think what Jason says is right. They more than ever, they think they could get away with it, ignoring it. I think it's great the way you keep on them. Of course, I'm sure. We've been talking about this weekly, and I always, I think you're probably surprised with BPD. I'm like, whatever. They're not going to hit the deadline. It's like this back and forth, and so I'm glad that they've at least communicated a little bit.
Yeah.
And I got to say, with surveillance stuff, with this kind of story, it's the kind of story we had a lot of, small outlet. We've had big impact over the years. We've drawn attention to these matters from city councils, from Somerville, Cambridge, Boston, and at the very least, showed people, hey, look up, looking at all around. I just can't stress enough that it cracks me up how these are story. If it's in a movie or something like that, or drones can have their 5 minutes of fame, but then they're completely out of public consciousness. And we're the type that do stories not exactly when the iron is hot. And I think it's important to nonetheless remind people, what's going on.
But if any of our colleagues from the larger Boston and New England press happen to be watching this anytime in the next little while, you understand that we know our place in the news ecology at BINJ. We kind of throw you the ball, and now you got to pick it up because we know we're relatively small, right? We do syndicate, we do hand stuff off. You don't have to feel like you're ripping us off. Just take the ball. And give it to, do more and push it out to your larger audiences. I mean, that's what we want to see happen. We want people to know about this stuff, or we wouldn't go to the trouble of reporting it, would we?
And props to Yahoo Miller, props to Yahoo
yes,
over
always.
the flip side, who we're actually, we're meeting up with this week, going to be doing more collaborations with Yahoo and does great work, so check out Flipside News, and there is surveillance. And drone coverage there as well, and some of the other places mentioned, of course, ACLU of Massachusetts, was a Technology for Liberty project. It's a very long, but you'll find it. Look up drones, look up BRIC, BRIC, Boston Regional Intelligence Center. But Eliza, really, this has been great, and I think that all of this stuff we've talked about warrants future coverage. And you're right in that wheelhouse we've been in for 10 years now, 10 years of BINJ, and I guess we haven't fixed everything. So.
Well, yeah, darn, darn. And are you from DOT? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Oh, me too. Weird. Well, we should talk about that sometime. So, yeah,
I feel like I should have known that, but yeah.
Well, no, it's complicated. It's not as simple as I'm from Dorchester, but I will explain off camera. In any case, I guess we're wrapping up. Eliza, is there anything else that you wanted to tell the nice people out there?
Support your local independent journalists and editors.
Hooray.
Hey.
All right. Well, let's exit the show with some chill hop. That will probably be too loud when it comes on.
Chill hop.
Oh, lovely.
I love it.
Well, this has been BINJ Live, episode number 2. I'm Jason Pramas. That's Chris Faraone. I'd like to thank our awesome guest, Eliza Dewey, our fellow reporter, BINJ reporter for many people. And we'll be back, we believe, next week. This is kind of a regular thing. So, bye, everybody. Bye.